On this episode of This Week in Linux, we've got a lot of distro news from Ubuntu, Solus, Fedora, Linux Lite, and more. We'll take a look at some updates from the Linux 4.16 development. And have you ever wanted to use Linux as your bootloader? Well, that might be possible in the future. For a nice change of pace from Oracle, we've got good news. And Purism released a progress report on the Librem 5. I'll also show you how you can watch Netflix content in full HD 1080p. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with TuxDigital, and this is your weekly source for Linux good news. LibreOffice and the Document Foundation are celebrating their 6th anniversary this week. The Document Foundation was established on February 17th, 2012, pretty much because Oracle decided to ruin OpenOffice. And also celebrating this week is the LibreOffice 6.0 has reached 1 million downloads since release, which was only a couple weeks ago, so that is pretty awesome. Congratulations to LibreOffice and the Document Foundation for being around for 6 years and thriving, and also thank you. Up next in the show is updates for Linux music players. First is Nuclear. It's an Electron-based application, and it kind of has like a Spotify-like interface. Looks pretty nice. This is a cloud-based streaming player. They have plans to add local files as well, but right now it's a cloud-based thing that allows you to search and play music from YouTube, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, and some more. It also offers scrobbling to Last.fm for what you're listening to at the time, and many more features. The thing that's actually really exciting for me about this is that they're working on a new plugin system and also making it possible so that you can have your own custom like HTTP, FTP server or some kind of protocol that allows you to have your own custom server to play music from wherever. And that's pretty cool. Then next up in the music players section, we have Tizonia. I would have said Tizonia up first, but the colors, I don't know. Tizonia, I don't know. It's also a cloud-based music player, but this was one for the command line. So this is pretty cool. It's open source command line music player for cloud-based services. Although it does support playing local files, it seems to be focused on the cloud-based stuff anyway. So it has support for Spotify, Google Play Music, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And with their latest release of 0.12.0, they've added Chromecast support which supports Google Play Music, YouTube, SoundCloud, and your standalone HTTP radio stations. They also have plans to allow for you to cast Spotify and local media in the future. And finally, in the music players of the week, Amarok got some news that they're porting to Frameworks 5. So Amarok is coming to Plasma 5 and Frameworks 5. So it's been a little while since Amarok had some attention. So it's pretty cool that it's getting it back. Now they're going to be like essentially 3 competing music players for the KDE stack. So that'll be interesting. I don't think I've actually said how long it's going to be until this is going to be ready, but it'll be probably a couple months or so. So anyway, check out Nuclear and Tizonia if you like, and mark your calendar for sometime this year for Amarok. We got some good news for the Netflix users out there. If you haven't noticed that you might be watching Netflix at a 720p rather than a 1080p quality, and that's because for some reason Netflix doesn't offer 1080p, even though it can, it just doesn't. So there's a workaround to make it provide 1080p for Linux users, and because of this, someone decided to make a Chrome extension that allows you to watch Netflix in 1080p on Linux. So that is awesome. Now, as not a Chrome user, I prefer Firefox. Thankfully, someone forked that one and created a Firefox version. You can also watch it in Firefox if you like with this extension. And this is available. They are both available in the add-on extension stores, so like the Play Store, the Chrome Web Store, and the Mozilla add-ons market. So you can just go and install it from there you don't have to use like the GitHub for that. So the links will be in the video description for these. And I just wanted to say that I do like how the original developer of the Chrome extension said, when asked why did he make it, his response was, why not? So that's fair. I like it. Up next on the show is Linux 4.16 development news. Now, typically we don't talk about the development news for kernels or pretty much any application because it's not really finalized. But they had some actual information I wanted to talk about specifically for Meltdown Inspector. For example, they have tested it for like benchmarking, and the performance impact so far seems to be around 6% for the vast majority of things that it's affected. But it only affects it in a big scale. So if you have like 50,000 system calls or something like that, then you'll see the effect. But if you have a small, just regular user amount of resource usage, you're typically not going to notice anything at all. You might every once in a while, but pretty much it's almost negligible to even worry about. So that's very nice to know. Like people were worried about it was going to be like potentially up to 35% performance impact, and so far the maximum is about 17, and that's a very rare use case. So the average is around 6 to 7%. And that's really cool. So I'm glad to know that it's not as bad as people thought it was. I mean, it's still bad, but it's not as bad as people thought it was as far as the impact comes, like the performance hit. The overall bug is still pretty awful, but at least it's not as bad as it could have been. And they are working on the patches to improve them and make them even more performance improved. So this is really good, and it's really great to see that the performance, one, not as bad as people thought it was going to be, and two, has potential to be improved even more. So that's great. In the intro, I said that Oracle has done something good for a change, and that is that they have open sourced, or technically more open sourced, I suppose, the dtrace for Linux utility into a GPL license and a UPL license, so like a combination license, which is really cool because it used to be CDDL, and while that's technically an open source license, it had potential for conflicting aspects to GPL. So there was issues of whether it could be included like mainline or not because of that. But with the GPL relicensing, it's really great because it allows it for it to be more like a proper Linux kernel module and potentially included in mainline kernel. So that's really good. If you're not aware of what dtrace is, it's basically for troubleshooting kernel and application problems on production systems in real time. So it is a powerful tool, and it is really nice to have. So it's great to see that they've decided to switch it to a GPL so that it could be included in the kernel itself. For a more detailed thing, the dtrace can do like a global overview of a running system. So like give you access to memory, CPU time, file system, and network resources information used by any active process. It can also be more like fine-tuned if you want. So it could give like a log of arguments and tell you which specific function is being called by an argument, as well as tell you like what processes are accessing a specific file in the system. Like you can go like really fine-tuned. So it's a very good thing that dtrace is now GPL'd. So thanks, Oracle. I'm not sure if I've ever said that before. Anyway, yeah, thanks, Oracle. During this week, we had some news about a USB attack vulnerability in KDE Plasma. Specifically, it's about whether when you plug in a thumb drive or flash drive, the device notifier could be tricked into doing and executing commands, which is not a good thing, but it has been a little bit blown up out of proportion as far as like various websites are claiming it's worse than it is. So for the reason why I'm saying it's not as bad is one, it's been solved. The advisory was just to say to update your system, which most people, if you are using Plasma, you can do that because Plasma updates pretty quickly. So that's really not a problem as far as getting updates. But the reason why it's a little bit more blown out of proportion is it requires someone to have physical access to the computer. It requires them to have a flash drive or thumb drive partitioned as VFAT, and for them to have a label that contains some characters and commands in the characters. So, like for example, these graves or the $ plus the parentheses. So you could have this with touch B included in the volume name, and that would allow you to execute arbitrary commands like touch B, which would create a file in your home folder. Now that's not good. Absolutely, that's a problem, but it's not. It's such a specific problem that it's unlikely for it to be executed on any individual. So people acting like it was worse than it is, it's not that bad. But it is bad, and it needs to be updated. And if you have an affected system, you should update because, well, it potentially could be a problem. First up in distro news is KDE Neon is hiding the Neon LTS edition for users from the download page. Now, you can still use the LTS edition. It's just not available on the download page. So if you already have it installed, you can still use it. It will still get updates and maintenance. As far as how long that will continue, we don't really know exactly, but based on the fact that Neon is going to transition to 1804, it could be not so long. It could be a few months or so before they decide to just completely get rid of it. But this is an interesting thing because they were saying that the Plasma LTS version of User LTS is not really that actively maintained and updated by the developers. So it implies something that it's not, like, because people look at LTS being, well, Plasma LTS and Ubuntu on top of Ubuntu LTS, that would be like, very stable and have a ton of attention. They would make sure it's perfect, that kind of thing. Well, they haven't really been doing that because that's not really the point of Neon. The point of Neon is to continuously get updates to the system for the KDE stack. That's the reason why they made Neon, was to have a core stable base where KDE continues to roll. So having that Neon LTS, user LTS thing is not really that effective for what they're trying to do with Neon in general. So it makes sense that they would get rid of it. Honestly, I was kind of confused when they made it in the first place, but it is interesting that they've decided to do this. So it implies that in the future there probably won't be a Plasma LTS on Neon. So when they switch to 1804 is my guess. I don't really know for sure, but that's my guess. I don't think this is that big of a deal because if you want Plasma LTS and you want it on Ubuntu LTS, you would just use Kubuntu LTS, for example. Especially with like Kubuntu 1804 having the same version that Neon will have at the time. So it kind of makes sense more to use Kubuntu in that sense if you want the LTS for Plasma. Just let me know in the comments below what you think about this news, and whether if you are a Plasma Neon LTS person, how are you going to upgrade to Neon User Edition, or are you going to try to find another solution? I'd love to know. This week we got some news from IPFire with an update for IPFire 2.19-Core 118. This is a firewall distribution for based on Linux. If you've heard of pfSense, that's a firewall distribution based on BSD kernel, and IPFire is like an alternative based on Linux. So this is a really cool distribution if you want to like host your own firewall, control your own firewall implementation. Now, the reason I'm bringing up this update is because they've introduced support for the fixes of Meltdown Inspector patching, and they've decided to remove PHP entirely from their distribution. Now, PHP is a really interesting language, and it's really powerful, but it's not really necessary for a firewall distribution to have, because PHP introduces a lot of headaches to manage it, because it is very powerful and very flexible, but it also has, because of that power and flexibility, it has a lot of headaches to deal with. They decided to just completely remove it, so that's pretty interesting. And if you're interested in like having your own open source firewall implementation and you want to use Linux, then check out IPFire. Up next in the show is the Canonical Corner. First up, they're going to be like collecting. Well, they haven't really said specifically guaranteed that they would be doing this. This is just a proposal right now. And I think it's a good idea because it's beneficial to the community as a whole. And I'll get to that in a second. But first, what they're going to be doing is collecting information about the installation and about, sometimes about update, like when you have a bug report, it'll keep track of that information as well. But what the idea is that through HTTPS, they're going to send data from your computer to their computer so they can have information about how you what your installation is. So like your hardware information, for example, like your CPU, your RAM, your OEM. Like, for example, like if you have a Dell laptop or Lenovo, they will know it's like a Dell or it's a Lenovo. Then they're also going to be tracking like what Ubuntu version you installed, what flavor of Ubuntu that you installed, like Kubuntu, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, etc. Also, the thing that's really getting people like bothered by is the location claim that people are saying. Now, it's not an IP or anything. It's not specific. It's just country. So like the country you installed the system in. Now, this is based on the IP, but it's a very broad information about it. I think the location is where people get bothered by it mostly, but it's not as bad as people are making it out to be. There are other things like auto login enabled or not when you install it, and there's the install time, how long it took to install, the duration. Things like that. And there's also going to be some stuff where if you've ever used Ubuntu in the past, when you get a bug crash of some kind in Ubuntu, there's a thing that pops up and says, would you like to send a report? And when you click yes, you have no idea what happened. Like there's no information about whether you actually sent anything or what you sent or whatever, or if it even sent. There's really no way to tell. And sometimes it didn't even send anything. But in this case, they're going to add apport to be configured automatically to send crash reports. And it'd be anonymous, of course, but so it wouldn't tell you, hey, pop up, you had a crash. It would just say, oh, there's a crash. Here's what happened. Here's the information. Here's stuff that is relevant to the crash, things like that. So overall, this is potentially good for both Ubuntu and all the flavors as well as everyone. And now, why is it potentially useful for everyone? They're going to be taking this information anonymously, of course, and they're going to aggregate it. And they're going to allow other people to look at it, anyone to look at it. It'll be transparent data provided by Canonical for everyone. So this is potentially really good information for other distro developers, for application developers, for just the ecosystem in general, to know how many people are actually installing Ubuntu, what kind of hardware people have, like how many AMD users are there, how many Intel users are there. How many people use high DPI screens versus not. All these different things is potentially a lot of good, useful information that could be helpful for everyone. But the idea, like when they first announced it, was like, okay, this is going to be a mess. But once they said that it was going to be transparent and the information would be available to anyone, that made me actually excited because that has a lot of potential to solve one of the biggest problems that we have as an ecosystem of when people say, how many people use Linux? And your response is, I don't know. It's a lot, but I don't know. Like that's a hard sell to people when you like, there's no way for us to tell you because there's no tracking information being done. Now, there are a couple distros that do provide information, but they're obscure distros that don't typically have a ton of users. Ubuntu is not only arguably guaranteed the most popular distro ever, especially if you count all the flavors. So this information is potentially like game-changing because it's transparent. Like that is actually good. Now, the only bad thing would be is like if the data was found to be like a lot of old hardware and people not upgrading. I guess that could be a negative to some people, but overall, that's not really. I don't think that'd be a big deal. I think while it could show how many people use on old hardware versus new, because the whole claim that people say that Linux is great for old hardware. Yeah, but it's also great for new hardware. So it's that's a weird claim to make. So we can even see how many people use old hardware versus new hardware. That would be good to know as well. How many people use 32-bit versus 64-bit? everybody's transitioning away from not everybody, but a lot of distros are transitioning away from 32-bit. We'd actually get good information about how to do this. And if this is done well with open source, transparent data, other distros could adopt the system to do it, and then we could get even more data to provide even more information and improve the ecosystem even more. That is potentially fantastic. So it depends on how this really how this ends up. How they build the system, how reliable that system is. Overall, this could be really good for everyone. Even though I know a lot of people will instantly hate it because it's not opt-in, it's opt-out. But I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to know whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea, especially with the potential for the entire ecosystem benefiting. Yeah, just let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Up next in the Canonical Corner is Mir 0.30 was released this week. The vast majority of it it's just basically an improvement for Wayland. So this is really good, and I'm pretty sure they also said they've already hired a new developer for Mir, so they're continuing to push the improvements as well. They also announced this week that there's potential for minimal installer of Ubuntu. Now this is not like a changing the installer. This would be just like whether you want to have a minimal install rather than the full install. So the minimal install implies that they would just remove applications that are not necessary for everyone. So for example, default applications like Rhythmbox or Thunderbird that not everybody wants to use, and maybe they just want to use their own choices. Like maybe I don't want to use Rhythmbox. I want to use Quadlibet or Clementine or whatever. So this makes it possible so that you could say, I want a slimmed down version of Ubuntu, and then I'll install the applications I want to install. So that's a pretty cool approach, and hopefully the other if they do this, the other flavors will consider this as well, and maybe even other distros. I know some distros already do this, but it'd be cool to see a lot more. And next up in the Canonical Corner is the 16.04.4 release of Ubuntu is set to release on 1st of March. Now this is the release we talked about being held back because of the Meltdown Spectre patches. So this is like they've announced that this will be the full release of that maintenance release for the 1604 LTS. This week we got an update for Linux Lite 3.8, which is the final release of the 3.0 series or 3.x series of Linux Lite. It comes with some nice updates for laptop power management. And, this is actually one of those distros. Earlier I talked about the potential of what distros provide 64-bit and 32-bit. This is one of them that does provide 32-bit as well. So if you are a laptop user, you might be interested in having the TLP power management tools being included. You also get better support for LibreOffice, like getting the newer version, I suppose. Then you also have a new font viewer and installer. And a lot of interesting things, like they have Lite tweaks, or Linux Lite tweaks, basically. Lite welcome. This is like a welcome screen that a lot of distros are doing now. I think that was either it was at least popularized. It might not have been created or started by Ubuntu Mate, but it was definitely popularized by Ubuntu Mate. They have a new upgrade in wallpapers tool, and they've made some improvements to XFCE 4 implementation. Overall, it's a nice update, and the release will be June 1st, 2018, and this will be Linux Lite 4.0. So this is the final release of the 3X series, and in June they're going to have a 4.0 series, which will be based on Ubuntu 18.04 LTS. We got some updates this week from Solus project. The updates are regarding the Solus 4 release. Linux 4.15 will be included in the update. A revamped software center will include the latest Linux driver management we talked about a couple weeks ago that Solus project has created for better hardware driver support. Then you have hotspot support for sharing networking connections and stuff like that. They're going to have support for Budgie 10.4.1, which is a maintenance point release, and Mate 1.20, which is a big release for Mate. You can already use these Mate 1.20 in Solus if you want, but this will be included in the Solus 4 update as well. Experimental Wayland session for the GNOME edition. And Solus devs have decided to delay the Snapd integration for Solus 4, so it won't be included in Solus 4, but in a future release it will be. I'm definitely looking forward to playing with the Linux driver management, a more finished product, the full distro ecosystem of it. So that will be interesting. Zevenet or Zevenet, not sure, 5.0 Community Edition was released this week. And if you're not aware, Zevenet or Zevenet something is an open source load balancer for providing high availability and content switching services. Now, this is mostly for like sysadmins and things like that. So if you're not that, I understand you might not care about this. But for those who are sysadmins, let me know what your opinion of it is, and I'll give you some basics about what this does. It allows you to have like session persistence over HTTPS and HTTP, virtual host, redirections, cookie insertion, reverse proxying. It also has ability to do like health checks for servers and services, and traffic scalability and distribution by like CPU load, memory usage, the amount of like connection throughput needed, like a lot of different features. So if you are a sysadmin and you are interested in checking out an open source load balancer, let me know. What's really interesting, I think, about is they have like you can do load balancing inside of a Docker container. So that's kind of weird, but still interesting. And if you do try it, let me know. I would love to know what your opinion of this particular distro is. So Zevenet 5.0 Community Edition. Before we continue with the show, next up is the Linux gaming news, and I wanted to address the question I asked of last week, was whether you'd want a spin-off of the gaming thing, the gaming news. What was interesting to me is that I had responses from both people who are gamers and not gamers, both asking for a spin-off, because the gamers want to have more content for the gaming, and the non-gamers want to have more non-gaming content in the main show. So I thought that was pretty funny, and I wanted to just say, if you still want to have, provide some your input on whether there should be a gaming news show separate from this main show, please do so in the comments below. The next segment is gaming, because I haven't really decided whether I want to do it or not, because it will add a lot of extra time for me to do. But if you are not a gaming fan, you still might want to watch these, because they're not specific. Well, two of them are not like game specific. They are like, well, I'll just go ahead and tell you, one's wine based and one's a cool hacking thing. So anyway, let's get to the gaming news. This week, the Wine Staging Project posted a notice that they're talking about the future of wine staging, that they don't really have time to work on the Wine Staging Project, and have decided to discontinue their involvement in it. Now, a lot of people have confused wine staging with wine, and that is definitely not the thing. Like, this is a subset, like this is a side project based on wine called Wine Staging, and what they do is take the development part of wine and then make some changes to make it more compatible with certain types of things like gaming and stuff like that. So this is more like saying that the creators, or I think that the project, you might have heard of it when they first created, the Wine Staging was first made because of the pipe light thing that was created, where they made it so that you could use the pipe light, Flash, and Silverlight tools back in for Netflix stuff like that back in the day, for like a few years ago, where it was a lot harder to use Netflix than it is now. But since then they transitioned to start doing work on wine overall itself, because they needed a separate version of wine to do patches and things so that they could have pipelight work. Now, once pipelight was no longer really necessary, they just decided to just start using, working on wine staging itself. Unfortunately, they've lost a lot of their time, like free time, to work on it, so they decided to just discontinue their involvement. Now, this is somewhat negative and the people, and think that like, oh, this might be like the end of wine staging, but it actually might not, because there's already a fork of wine staging on GitHub, and it definitely doesn't have any effect to wine itself. So, yeah, though this is interesting, but it's not really a reason to be concerned because it's already been forked, and the one of the main developers of Wine has made a comment about this, and that they are considering, working with the new fork to see if they can, make sure that the wine staging project doesn't end. So that's good news. It's, a little bit of bad news followed by some pretty good news. So, yeah. Last week we talked about the Nintendo Switch being hacked to run Linux, and they just showed the kernel booting and things like that. But now we have even more information about how it worked, and a demonstration of KDE Plasma running on top of the Nintendo Switch. That's really cool. And what's even more interesting is that the touch functionality of the Switch works very well with KDE Plasma. Or Linux in general. I was surprised because it seems like something that was not intended to work on Linux. The touch aspects of it work better than some laptops made to work with Linux. So that's kind of sad, but also really interesting to see how it works. And they've also gave more information about how the exploit, like it's a hardware exploit, and what exactly that means in the video during the demonstration. So I'm not going to play the video here because I want you to just go ahead and check out the link in the show notes so you can watch it directly on their Twitter account from Fail Overflow. This week we got some great news from the Feral Interactive team. They're going to be porting Rise of the Tomb Raider to Linux, so that's fantastic. And if you haven't played Tomb Raider before, it's a action adventure game, third person action adventure. It's had like one of the longest running franchises in gaming history. For the first few times that it came out, it was amazing. Then they kind of had a falling off, after halfway through a few years ago. But thankfully, in 2013, they brought in a new version of the Tomb Raider series that was quite good, really great, actually. And the Feral Interactive made that version for Linux a couple years ago, and it's really fun, and I can't wait to play the newest version of Rise of the Tomb Raider because it looks like the trailer and all the gameplay I've seen looks fantastic. It's just, I'm a Linux gamer, so I haven't played it yet, but I am looking forward to it coming to Linux. They said this spring, so we don't really know exactly when, but hopefully we'll get some new information in the future. And when we do, I'll let you know. LinuxBoot is a new project that is pretty interesting. The idea is to essentially make instead of using a separate bootloader, you could effectively make Linux the bootloader. So it replaces the firmware of specific firmware functionality like UEFI, DXE, and uses the Linux kernel and runtime as the firmware for modern servers and stuff like that. Now it's right now it's in its early stages, so it's basically just for servers, but it has potential to do even more in the future. So in theory, it could be possible that you may in the future use Linux to boot Windows. I mean, maybe it's definitely possible if LinuxBoot picks up pace. So who knows? The 2018 Google Summer of Code organizations were announced this week. The Google Summer of Code is a global program focused on introducing students to open source software development. Students work on a 3-month programming project with an open source organization during their break from university, for example. The Google Summer of Code was first started in 2005, and since then they've worked with over 13,000 students, 12,000 mentors, over 125 countries have been involved, and they've produced over 33 million lines of code for 608 open source organizations throughout the years. Now, this I'm including in this show because there's a lot of relevant Linux-related projects that were selected this year. I'm just going to go through a quick list, and if you're wanting to know more about these projects or find out the rest of the list, you can find the link to in the show notes below. So first up, we got Apache, Blender, GNOME, KDE, Xorg, Debian, Fedora, FFmpeg, Gentoo, Git, GNU, Godot, Inkscape, Jitsi, LibreOffice, Matrix.org, Mix, Moodle, Mozilla, OpenStreetMap, Rocket Chat, Linux Foundation, Qt, VLC, Wine, and Kodi. There's actually a few more that I missed, and there's some BSD stuff in there too as well, if you like that kind of thing. So Google Summer of Code 2018. If you want to learn more, check out the link in the video description. This week we got a progress report from Purism for the Librem 5. They included photos of the PureOS running on a dev board, as well as proof of the first SMS being sent through the dbus for the phone. They've shown that the separate baseband is working as specified. And they've also shown that the dev board is working on the iMX6 processor, but they're waiting for the next, instead of waiting to do all the development once they get the new board of the iMX8, they are currently working on the MX6 previous version. So when they have the iMX8 in their hands, they'll be showing development board for that. The next step is also, they've said, is making phone calls work. So that's cool. They also have some information they've provided, like what the default desktop environment is going to be. Well, not really desktop environment, but the default environment being used for the future of the phone. And that is that they've decided this is a quote from the Purism team. At Purism, we want a unified default desktop environment, and considering that we have chosen GNOME to be the default on laptops, we hope to extend GNOME to also be the default on phones. Now, this is actually disappointing to me because there is no mobile GNOME project from the GNOME team. And Purism even says this, that they were going to be the front runners for this thing. So instead, they decided to choose something that doesn't exist, that they have to make, rather than stuff that already exists. That's just... Okay. Anyway, so they're going to put more work on top of themselves to do something that people don't even expect that they can even do in the first place. I hope do make a great product, and they do make GNOME work on mobile, because I look forward to having this phone. I'll probably switch it out for Plasma Mobile anyway, but I do look forward to this phone, and I hope we get some more progress reports, and the development is on track for the release in 2019. So we got some information this week about a 0-day vulnerability in Telegram. Now, they're using the ROL Unicode method, which is a right-to-left override. This is pretty bad. They've found that this has been exploited, actively exploited since March of 2017 for cryptocurrency mining. They've shown some brief explanations about what it could be doing. So it essentially can do anything. It could install whatever it wants. They just happen to be doing it for crypto mining. They've also found that it's possible to steal the local cache of any of the victims, that they could just take whatever cache is inside of the Telegram for that device. In theory, they could install whatever they wanted and do even more because it's a 0-day. In other security news, that's not as depressing. Google Chrome HTTP sites are now going to be displaying not secure notifications. They'll have a little symbol, the potentially dangerous symbol with the words not secure in the address bar when you go to that website. Now, Firefox already indicates a website, whether it's HTTP or HTTPS, but they do it in a much more subtle way. So, for example, if you go to a website and it's not secure, you can get the little informational button icon that's in the address bar, and then it'll tell you there that it's not secure. Now, that doesn't seem like it's enough, probably to some people, but they also do something else, so that if you go to a website that is not secure and there's a form that you start trying to fill out, Firefox will then have a little pop-up that says, are you sure you'd like to fill it out, because this is not secure and you might not want to do it. But they only display that when you start to interact in that way with a not secure website. So that's one. It's more subtle. It's not in your face, so it's a more gradual notification. I like that, but I also see the benefits of what Chrome is doing, where they're going to change it in July is where they announced it. In July 2018 is when they announced they're going to do this. They are going to put this in the address bar, which is going to have a bigger impact because it's in your face and it's not subtle like the way the Firefox does it. So I'm curious to see what happens with the developer world of websites. I'm actually involved in that world. So there's probably going to be some potential of users being scared by this notification and contacting the website developers and trying to get them to switch to HTTPS so it's more secure, or so it's not giving them that notification. Some people would argue that because of Let's Encrypt, there's no reason not to have SSL or HTTPS, but that's not necessarily true because there are some servers that don't make it easy to update your certificate and they even charge to include the certificate, even if the certificate itself is free. So like there is some, it's not as simple as Let's Encrypt exists, you should use it. That does make it a lot easier to do it, but there's still some more variables that make it more difficult. But this is definitely going to be something that might make those hosting companies have to just, accept more certificates because more and more people are going to be bothered by it and more developers are going to have to deal with that. So who knows? I'm very much interested in see what happens, and hopefully this is like one of the stepping stones to make the internet, more secure where everybody uses SSL, because really, it's a good thing. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/Patreon. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere. Or if you don't want to type as much, you can go to tuxdigital.com/shirt. Just a reminder, the show is live every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, so join us in the live chat room to discuss all the latest Linux news each week. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with Tux Digital. And as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.